Allison, as tired as she was from poring over contradicting information from multiple books regarding thieves' guilds, she couldn't sleep for some reason. It could have been the fantasies of what she'll do when she gets her hands on the ancient texts, or it could have been the wrongful thoughts she's been having about Ezekiel. As she decodes moral quandary after moral quandary in her mind in search of if she was right or wrong, she just can't find the true answer. It had been years since then. Does that justify her emotions? But what of her current plans? Is that the part that makes her wrong? She pinches the quill too hard from the mental stress, and it snaps in half, creating an erratic zigzag in between her penmanship. Allison thought scribing this scroll into her spellbook would be a nice recreational activity, but it seemed like the storm of emotions and thoughts and ideas seemed to persist. She just hopes that the few teardrops that dripped from her eyes to the parchment of her spellbook won't ruin any of the ink. "Allison?" A voice suddenly sounded from behind the door. Ezekiel asked earlier if he could brew himself some tea, and she just told him yes to get some peace and quiet. "What? I'm busy." "Do you want some tea? I made some extra, in case you wanted some." Something about those familiar words made a few more tears fall from her eyes. She inhaled deeply and wiped her eyes with her sleeve as she opened the door. Yes, I'd like some, dear," she said, as if she lived in another time. She suddenly closed her eyes, realizing what she said, and some tears still ran down her eyes. Her sight was still hazy from the tears, but she could see him retrieve the teacup from the tray with one hand and placing it closer to her so she may pick it up. He said nothing, just an empathetic smile and a gesture of zippered lips. Allison grasped the hot surface as Ezekiel closed the door for her. She could only take a sip of the tea, scalding her tongue but chuckling to herself. He didn't put any sugar in this. Forgetful, just like him. The partners' eyes meet once more in the morning when the tiefling walked down the stairs. There was a brief moment of pause. Allison could more easily repress her wild emotions from last night after a nice long sleep. Ezekiel could only see her tired face whilst remembering seeing her vulnerable side. It was such a stark contrast to the cold and calculating abjurer he first met. "Good morning. Sleep well?" he asked sincerely, breaking the silence. "Just fine. I was just scribing a spell last night." "What are you reading?" Allison asked, taking a seat in the cushioned armchair. She had seen him read the same pocketbook back in the tavern, too, but she wasn't as interested in Ezekiel as she is now. He was some kind of logical anomaly to her. He doesn't act like any other mercenary she's met, nor does he even act like a soldier. It's called Burden of Battle. It's a book that teaches a lot about the fundamentals of martial arts. It reads like a journal of an old master, so it's pretty fun to read. Comes with illustrations, too. Ezekiel closed the book and placed it down on the table. "You ready to discuss our plans for today?" "Over breakfast," Allison replied, already headed to the kitchen. Despite what Allison said, they discussed plans while they cooked and during breakfast. He wasn't some savant in the kitchen, but he made a useful assistant. She was half expecting him to be some kind of prodigy jack-of-all-trades, but he was indeed mortal like everybody else. In fact, he was quite honest about his lack of domestic skills. He admitted having wood-carving skills, however. It was his father's craft that he took an interest in, again showing that he's not just a typical warrior, if that wasn't clear yet. As she continued to speak with him past their planning phase, he presented more of the inner workings of his mind. Ezekiel didn't seem like the type to be involved in deep discourses relating to personal philosophies. Even after they had left the house, they were still discussing things, going back and forth with their beliefs and ideals. It becomes clearer and clearer what kind of man Ezekiel is. The same could be said for Ezekiel's perception of Allison. The Battlemaster had always known what he fought for through his honed instinct and experiences. But now that he had put it into words, he found himself to have achieved clarity through the ways of combat. There's plenty of things that get lost in translation when only words are spoken. Battle is the act of change or approving. People show their true colors in a battle whether they like it or not. You just have to see it. He is reminiscent of the monks that Allison looked down on. It was rare for her to be given a new perspective on things, and even more rare for another person to be the reason for it. And to answer your question from yesterday, Ezekiel looked into the blue sky, flanked by a few high buildings to the sides. I guess I do what I do because I have the privilege of making a difference in the problems that the people face, you know? If I can help, why shouldn't I? He answers with a smile on his face, happy with the life he lives despite the dangers he faces. Allison confirmed that he really was her opposite. She saw the world as points of data, mathematics, and probability. She wasn't so optimistic like Ezekiel. Every decision she had made in her life was deliberate and carefully calculated. I simply can't comprehend living in such a haphazard life, she says with a chuckle and actually enjoying this intelligent conversation. I prefer actually knowing what tomorrow will bring through the decisions I make. Discourse and study is what creates progress and solves problems, wouldn't you agree? Understanding the unknown ahead of us is always better than just always looking where we already are. I agree, but even the greatest minds need to just enjoy their time in the world. Time is limited for all of us. It's a shame if every hour was spent studying the painting instead of just seeing how beautiful the painting is. Ezekiel faced Allison to see what she thought. She would never admit it out loud, but what he said was something she had never considered before. It was insightful, to say the least. Ezekiel probably saw that on her face, with her silvery eyes met his. "You think so simply, Ezekiel," she said with an eye roll and a smirk. "And you act like everything is so complicated, Allison," he replied, chuckling as he playfully gives her a pat on the back. With their lengthy talk of philosophy done with, they gained a sense of trust between each other. Allison was quite refreshed after a talk like that. Most people found her personality grating, to say the least, and while she was all right with whatever she was perceived as, it did leave her wanting a regular conversation. They arrived at the neck of another alleyway. This wasn't the pristine tourist trap plaza that the city is known for. The two were standing in the place where the travel brochures left out for obvious reasons. Ignoring the litter and smell here, they hugged the wall, giving each other a nod after a quick peek over the edge. There was one guard there, so she knew exactly what to do. "Hey, quick, put this on," she said to Ezekiel, passing him a cloth. "I have a spell perfect for this. Just follow my lead." The elf simply nodded and tied the cloth over half of his face, properly concealing his identity. They began walking down the alleyway to the door at the end, but the burly guard met them halfway. Ezekiel had faith in Allison's plan. "I suggest you let us pass." There was a faint glow to her hand as she slowly waves it in front of him. "I will let you pass," he replied slowly. "You will leave the premises and inform a guard about this place." The man just stood there with a neutral expression, unspeaking. Allison could feel a bead of sweat trickle down the side of her head. Even Ezekiel nonchalantly fidgeted, masking the movement of his sword hand to the hilt. "I will leave the premises and inform a guard about this place," the man finally replied after the longest 3 seconds of their lives. Ezekiel and Allison had a sigh of relief as the guard walked away. "Good work. Got a plan for inside too?" "I'll put them into a stupor. If someone isn't affected, you can deal with them. I can hold the spell for as long as I can maintain concentration, so just go in there, find the boss, and then find the text." Allison spoke in a hushed tone as they took the flanks of the door, getting ready to breach. After a nod and a quiet countdown, Ezekiel kicks the door open with Allison right behind him. She casts a spell called Hypnotic Pattern, creating a swirling, twisting image of lights above the room. Ezekiel resisted its effects. Unfortunately, it seems like the masked and cloaked figure did too. He was even holding a container of the text in one hand and a nasty, orcish curved blade on the other. Without any time for pleasantries, the two engaged in a tight battle around the 5 people, under the effects of the colorful patterns above them. Ezekiel didn't realize that the leader was directing their engagement to the back door until the moment he tossed the container out the window, and a glowing marble appeared on the tip of his finger as his blade crossed with Ezekiel. The leader sent it to the center of the room where Allison stood in front of. Several instances occurred all at once. The breaking of the leader's guard, with Ezekiel's blade zooming across the fabric of his hood and mask. Allison raising a hand to use a spell to negate the incoming fireball, only to realize she did not have counterspell prepared today. And Ezekiel shouting the tiefling's name as he brought her to the ground before the room was engulfed in fire. Her nails dug deep into Ezekiel's armor as she felt the heat of the blast even under the Battlemaster's protection. As she reluctantly opens her eyes, the leader still stood there, his hood pushed back and his rudimentary mask slashed. He throws it to the ground, revealing a pale human man with a flesh wound across his cheek. To Allison, it wasn't just any man, however. He was a man who had died a long time ago. He was the man whose death caused her so much grief and despair alongside the young boy she should have raised. His piercing crimson eyes met hers with an expression of permanent anger and disdain. No, that's impossible, Allison mumbled to herself as she tried to crawl her way out of the groaning Ezekiel. By the time she could get up, the leader had already left the building. The last thing she saw was this man hopping to a covered carriage. He maintained eye contact for only a brief moment before closing the curtains. Behind her was the sound of yelling guards and the splashing of water. Her focus was suddenly back to reality. A burning living room with many bodies strewn about. Some of them were charred, while others seemed to be still alive. Before she knew it, she had rushed down to her knees to check on Ezekiel, turning him to his back. He coughed and hacked, but somehow he just smiled through the pain. Not dead, he told her with a thumbs up. You foolish bastard! Why didn't you take cover? I'm a tiefling! Fire doesn't bother me! The last bit stretched the truth, but she could care less now that she realized the kind of danger Ezekiel imposed on himself. Sorry. My instincts just kicked in and, well, I just did it. At least you're safe. After those words, the healers from the church finally tended to their wounds. Allison was fine, but Ezekiel had to get his burns treated with ointment and healing magic. The guards recognized Ezekiel as the man that was helping them investigate the theft, so they didn't need to be questioned like the others who survived the blast. The two were just sat outside the thieves' safe house, laying their backs on the stone wall while the guards cleaned out the area and interrogated the living thieves. Hey, mind if I ask some questions while we take a break? Ezekiel said to break the moody silence. Allison was blanked out, thinking about impossible scenarios. She was almost thankful that Ezekiel spoke up. Her own thoughts began to cannibalize themselves. Sure, but I still want you to admit that you're an idiot for risking your life like that. Again. She was still upset over the fact he got himself injured again, because of her. It was somewhat illogical, but she felt guilty that she was the one who kept needing to be saved. Why do you want those texts so badly? Seems to be attracting quite powerful people, so I doubt it's just some book. Allison lied all the time, either for the sake of convenience or to actually hide something. But it's always hard to lie to the man who hasn't told a lie. Or at least, not toward her, anyway. I told you before, it's for power. Something so powerful that people would kill for it. Like what we both just saw. Allison closed her eyes and inhaled, just breathing in the stale air of the slums, putting her head back on the stone and tucking her legs in. Do you know what loss feels like, Ezekiel? Of course I do. The work I do is dangerous. I see people die all the time. It never gets easy. Ezekiel could only rest his head, making sure he doesn't hurt himself by moving his injured parts. No, I mean real loss. Someone dear or important. No words came out of his open mouth. It was true, so many have died around him throughout his life, but he slowly got over them. accepting it as nature or admitting to his faults. Wouldn't you do anything to honor them? To make sure their legacy lives on? Allison continues. She's being vague, but she does want to hear what he had to say about it. I would. I'd say I'm honoring my parents right now by following what my heart wants, like what they said before they passed. Ezekiel had a short, easygoing laugh, remembering his parents, confident that they would be proud of him. He was so ignorant of her words. She felt some regret seeing such bright optimism being generated from her misleading statements. But she must do what she must to achieve what she needs to do. They received word from the guards regarding the whereabouts of their leader. One of the lieutenants survived the blast and ratted out the man they called the Revenant. Nothing breaks bonds like fireball to the face. It was far into the woods outside the city. They had to get a horse to ride there. Ezekiel was luckily loaded with money, so getting a horse wasn't too difficult. Allison had to grasp onto Ezekiel's shoulders or backpack as the horse gallops at top speed. She had to get ready for the fight. Whatever she saw, whatever is commanding these bandits, is not going to let go of those texts easily. Ezekiel was expecting a tough fight himself. If individual combatants wouldn't stop him, their numbers will be a problem. Can I trust you? Ezekiel asked, with reluctance in his tone. I'll be honest. I saw that expression in your face when you saw him. There was fear there, and confusion. Allison was surprised, to say the least. Much of her energy is spent concealing her emotions through a mask. He couldn't see her state at the moment. Allison tightens her grip on his backpack, burying her face into the fabric, and watches the trees go by at the side. You can trust me. I have my emotions in check, I promise. This was the only lie she would ever allow herself to make. She just needed Ezekiel for this one final stretch. Maybe he'll even walk out alive. That's good. I'll be counting on you, so you can count on me too, okay? Ouch, was the only word she could conjure upon hearing that. They left the horse just outside the tree line as soon as they found the right symbol in the trees after riding a certain distance. With weapons out, they trekked through the forest with caution, barely any talking amongst the two of them. Like they expected, these bandits seemed like they were going to stop at nothing to impede their intervention. Striking from places least expected and firing from the bushes. Allison could make quick work of the archers while Ezekiel could protect her from the guerrillas striking with their short swords. As the fighting progressed, as they kept walking in further, Ezekiel had honed the art of deflecting arrows with his shield as Allison stayed close behind him. For every arrow he blocked and firebolt sent from behind Ezekiel's steadfast shield, they could feel their bonds solidify. There was no room for hesitation or doubt in their mind in such a deadly battlefield. Allison is likely beginning to understand a sliver of what Ezekiel feels in battle. She actually felt safe enough to focus on one thing at a time, something that couldn't be done if the Battlemaster wasn't there protecting her from arrows or guerrilla fighters. She didn't waste any of her spells except for giving herself additional armor made of arcane energy to better boost her rate of survival in these fights. Her heart just keeps filling with dread as the fights go on, with only a few minutes of respite before the next batch of bandits show up. She could only imagine the ferocity that they will face when they get to the end of this adventure. After one final, drawn-out combat against the bandits, they arrived at a clearing with some kind of stone monolith piercing through the ground, pointed toward the sky. The Revenant steps down and turns around from the monument, making it clear that the book was being used for some kind of ritual. It floated surrounded in arcane energies. The Revenant was flanked by his fanatical bandits and robed figures. Allison walked behind Ezekiel as they approached the leader of this operation. I'm giving you a chance to surrender, Revenant. But somehow I know you would rather die here, Ezekiel said with the poise of a dignified warrior. Allison was only hoping that he would see reason, or at least negotiate, but He only roared in response, and she knew that she had one last trial to survive. The fight opened up with a barrage of magic missiles zooming toward Allison, to which she negated with a projected shield, conserving some of the abjuration spells for a passive force field that she could provide additional armor for. Ezekiel met with the Revenant and 3 of his lackeys as they all dashed to join the fray. Like a whirlwind of blades, each bandit was cut down swiftly after a few mere strikes. The only one remaining was the Revenant that proved himself to be quite the swordsman. From what Allison could see at the corner of her eye, the 2 strongest men that she had ever seen in her life faced each other in merciless combat. One unstoppable storm of steel, and the other an immovable brute with the strength of 10 men. She had to focus on eradicating what she could only describe as cultists. They seemed to be using abjuration spells as well, but she knew what they were capable of and what they weren't. A few chromatic orbs did the trick, even against their shields. After the last cultist fell, she had a spell that would put a stop to this violence once and for all. She would have halted both Ezekiel and the Revenant if she didn't just see the brute launch Ezekiel several feet away with a devastating upward swing. She gasped, and began involuntarily started taking steps toward where he landed. There was blood clearly showing from where his chain shirt and gambeson were torn apart. Her steps were stuttered and broken, still deliberating if this was the right choice to make. 2 sides of her mind were practically warring with each other now. "Allison," the Revenant spoke, extending his hand outward. "You've come to seek the same power as I have?" She stopped in her already dragging steps. "What?" she stuttered at the creature that slowly resembled her husband as she turned to him. "Alwyn? Is that really you?" Ezekiel coughed and hacked, blood trickling down his mouth and splattering all over the grass. "Don't listen to him. He's no longer what he once was. He's been twisted by magic." He feared that his pleas fell in deaf ears as she inched closer and closer toward him and his honeyed words. "It's been so long since that horrid night, my sweet," Alwyn said to her, dropping his blade. "I have come this far and wide in search of a way where our family could be whole again." She remembers that night as clear as day. 7 years ago. Rivaling mercenary gangs fought Alwyn alone in front of the house, and as his wounded body stumbles in, he shouts for his family to leave, and telling that their qualms was only with him, the only real combatant in the scenario. But they made it personal, killing Alwyn, and as Allison and her child ran, a stray arrow struck her son's back. She was not the same woman since, growing distant from the world and building a cold exterior to protect the fragility beneath the ice. What happened to you? How is this possible?" She was at the verge of tears, seeing only the man that could make her vulnerable. "A dark blessing brought me here, but it allowed me to seek what I desire. And what I desire is a happy life with you and our little Dalen. Like how it should have been, not this nightmare." Allison could see it in his eyes. The dark arts that fuel him is powerful, despite the maelstrom of emotions that surged deep within her, making her want to take every step across the grass into his arms. It's not that simple. It's never that simple. Allison, please. Don't. Ezekiel's world began to grow dark at the edges of his vision. The only warmth in his cold hands was the fresh blood that ever so slowly stopped trickling out of him. Allison's tears began to wash her cheeks as she hears the life leave out of Ezekiel's body, the only friend she had ever made in these dark years. I don't know what to do," she said to Alwyn, or to Ezekiel, or to herself, maybe even to the gods themselves. I have deciphered the powers of these old magics, my love. Simply chant our wish to the arcane powers that rule over our reality, and we shall have our beautiful life back. Only one truly talented with the arcane can activate the dormant magic within. He steps aside, presenting a clear path to the ever-enlarging sphere of unfettered energy. Allison takes a step forward, and another, becoming slowly into a muted walk to her destiny. Her mind was devoid of all thought. There was no plan, there was no grand scheme, or a moral debate. It was simply a matter of doing. Her hands entered the sphere's flowing energy. The only thing left to do was chant. She spoke in Infernal, the tongue native to her kind. She chants and chants until she breaks down into tears, but that wasn't going to deter her. I wish for Ezekiel Mirakel to be resurrected. I wish for Ezekiel Mirakel to be resurrected. Her voice booms through the magic powers that surged in her body. Her voice became hoarse as she screams her wishes into the heavens. A hand suddenly lands on her back, and she was forced to turn from the ritual. Before any sound could be uttered, a large dagger comes crashing down toward her, accompanied by a horrible roar of anger. She projected a shield out of sheer survival instinct, but it was useless. The violent slash went through her protection, and even through her signature ward. She was felled in one blow. As the Revenant turns, his nemesis was already back on his feet. No words needed to be said. Ezekiel had let go of every emotion, every distraction, every shackle in his mind, and has to finish this. The frenzied Revenant was reckless and destructive. He was blinded by rage while Ezekiel kept his cool. But even a man who had achieved an epiphany in battle was still a person. Thus some of his anger seeped into his fighting style, trading the defense of his buckler for the speed of a cheetah with one blade. The weight of each blow coming from the Revenant was nothing, as his force was redirected elsewhere, and countless slashes hit him before he could even recover. Ezekiel had never swung his blade in one flurry for this long before. He truly proved himself to be the radiant blade of Azaria, as the Revenant could no longer defend himself and was left at the mercy of the storm. Ezekiel could only drop his sword, not even catch his breath after the beast was defeated. He dropped to his knees as he desperately looked for something in his bag to heal Allison. Anything. "I'm sorry," Allison said weakly, tears streaming down her face. "I got you killed. I was so stupid. I can't believe I was so foolish. I'm so sorry." She fumbled and stammered over her words as she grasped one of his arms. "I'm such a fool." "Shush! Drink!" Ezekiel, without hesitation, poured the strongest potion he had, and it began to mix with the light rain that began to shower the forest. She coughed and gagged as the rejuvenating powers of the potion took effect. Before the magic could even close her wounds all the way through, she immediately jumped to her knees and threw herself into Ezekiel's arms. She wasn't just sobbing. Allison cried and cried without a care in the world. She cried for all that she had lost and all of her mistakes. Allison could not cry the first time she had lost her loved ones, but now she could. Now that there was someone that could catch her at her lowest. "Please, Ezekiel," she cried some more. "Please tell me I did the right thing." She murmured the word please repeatedly as she buried her face at the crook of his neck. The elf hugged her tightly, knowing what kind of grief she must be going through right now. "You would have been consigned to a dark fate alongside what evil master had brought your husband back from the dead. You are not to blame for his fate. It's okay. It's all right. I'm here for you, Allison." "I couldn't bring them back, Ezekiel," she spoke, as she was still comforted by the washing rain and his gentle touch. "I promised them that I would find some way for us to be happy again, and yet—" "You can still be happy, Allison. They're gone, and I know what it feels like to have your whole world be robbed from you. But you can move on. Today was not the day where you met your end. That means you still have tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that one. You just need time. Ezekiel stared intensely into her eyes to show him the determination he carries. Allison could only see herself in that steely gaze. Will you be there with me? She asked him with the sincerity of an angel. Every step of the way, he answered without a single hesitation. The tiefling burst into tears once more, giving into her pent-up emotions and kissing Ezekiel right on his cheeks as she wiped her tears on the uncomfortable leather pauldrons that he had. Ezekiel could only let out a tired laugh toward the sky, softly brushing her hair and wondering if it was the higher powers who finally decided to grace this lonesome, elven stranger with a companion, or simply the chaotic will of fate. He could care less which, of course. He had a wonderful partner to look after and appreciate. It's just as simple as that for him.